And so the subject then is the dominant half of the brain. And it implies immediately that you can decide which half of the brain you will allow to dominate. The Lord Saint Germain, Lord of the seventh ray and the third ray, the Count Saint Germain had a very powerful capacity to control both his cerebral hemispheres at the same time. He was a person who could write two letters at once, one with each hand, and each of the two letters would be different. By letters I mean epistles, a whole letter. And when you come to think about this, it is a remarkable feat, and yet it only implies something at the physical level. What was far more important by this demonstration of his, the ability to write a letter with each hand, was his control of the inner world, the inner planes, as we shall see as my talk progresses. The cerebral hemisphere are two parts of the brain that swell out of an original tube in the embryo. We all begin life with a neural tube in embryo, and in the forepart of this tube we get a swelling of the tube to produce what are known ultimately as the cerebral hemispheres. And so eventually we get a great dilatation and growth into the forebrain. And these two dilatations eventually become what we call the cerebral hemispheres. And that would be the shape of one of them, and there would be a second one, like that, and so we would refer to them as the left and right cerebral hemispheres. And they occupy by far the major volume of the brain. And these hemispheres are important to us because they contain the site of consciousness. It is here that consciousness dwells. And therefore, if the esoteric methods are used for transferring impressions, it would be helpful to have a general picture of the cerebral hemispheres so that you can visualize them in another person that you wish to reach. Energy follows thought. Visualize the cerebral hemispheres of another person and you are sending energy to them. You are assisting them perhaps in their depression. You are helping their level of consciousness, their level of awareness. So the cerebral hemispheres are important. They are not only the centers of consciousness, but they are virtually in charge of any movement of the body, any conscious movement of the body. And in fact, the whole surface of the hemisphere is, as it were, made up of gray matter. And the gray matter is comprised of large cells with their nuclei which lie in the surface of the brain. And these nerve cells, by means of relays, transmit right down, say, to the small toe or the finger, a line of electrical activity which enables us to move a finger or to move an arm, a sort of communication system. And for everything that we can do, there is a place on the brain for it. There is a place on the brain for it. And so we could really take this gray part of the cerebral hemispheres and in our minds lay it out like a sort of map. And we could say that there is movement of the little finger, there is the movement of the head and the trunk, and this moves the arms and that moves the legs and so on. This is the region which is responsible for our ability to smell. Here we have visual experiences. Here we have the sense of hearing, and this is the speech area, and so on and so on and so on, and we can map out most of the surface of the area of the brain. Of course, there are regions which we're not clear about, but generally speaking, that is the plan. And it means that anything that we do, whether we smell or touch or hear, anything that comes into our consciousness is related to some surface part of these two cerebral peduncles, or hemispheres. Now, in average man, in ordinary man, one hemisphere tends to dominate. In other words, instead of sharing these activities between the two equally, the left hemisphere tends to dominate. By that I mean this hemisphere tends to dominate over the right hemisphere. And this doesn't mean that the right hemisphere doesn't do anything at all. It sort of understudies the left hemisphere. And if you move the parts of your body, or if you smell or touch and so on, generally speaking, the left hemisphere is involved, and the right hemisphere will merely understudy it, so that if the left is damaged, the right can take over to a great extent. So we get some impression of the general concept of the dominant half of the brain. Now, the esoteric proposition is that most of the qualities related to the subjective life, to the meditative way of life, to the intuitional life, to the life of the disciple, the qualities that are really considered important are most frequently allocated to the right side of the brain. And a person who is polarized almost fatally to the left hemisphere, to the dominant hemisphere, is a person who cannot experience intuition, cannot experience the finer qualities of life that we regard as essential to discipleship. And that is what this lecture is about this afternoon. How to know yourself in this respect, and how to intervene in this part of your equipment so that you can begin to become more effective as a disciple, learn to meditate better, learn to bring through the soul's forces and allow the soul to grasp the lower vehicles of the physical body, the astral body, and the mental body, through learning to damp down the dominant half of the brain and to stimulate and encourage expression of the less dominant half of the brain. And so, to begin with, I'm going to deal with some very important but very mundane facts that need to be faced by the disciple. And it is this, that we tend, as people immersed in the material way of living, we tend to entrench certain characteristics on the left side of the brain that form obstacles to us on the path of discipleship. And as long as that hemisphere dominates, and as long as these factors are energized from this part of the brain, they prove obstacles of great difficulty to us to overcome. The movement of every one of us towards personality integration, of course, is important. When we are at a level of personality integration, we are instruments for the masters. And the master will rarely take up an individual who is not reliable, who is unstable. What they need is an individual who is malleable and susceptible to teachings, to the influx of soul energy, but who can be relied upon. And by that, of course, we talk about an integrated personality. And the movement towards personality integration is a path that leads the disciple out of illusion into the clear light. And that comes when someone knows his soul's purpose and relinquishes all to serve it. And some of the things that I have to say to you today related to the dominant half of the brain will be unpleasant to you. But believe me, if you can clear these things away, then the soul's purpose can be better served when they are at least recognized, even if we can't deal with them immediately. In terms of the physiology of the of the lower triad of bodies, it is the overcoming of whirlpools and eddies that exist in the astral and mental bodies that constitute the greatest barriers on the path towards integration. All of us are in the process of integrating our astral bodies, of literally creating out of a sheath of astral substance which accompanies the birth of a child, we are all in the process of taking that sheath and building it into an integrated and stable emotional nature. According to Leadbeater, it is eddies and currents, whirlpools that exist in the astral body that produce the instability that holds integration of personality from us. And this is true also of the mental body. The whirlpools, the currents and eddies that flow in these bodies, which, as it were, keep the consciousness constantly rippled and disturbed, and we have to overcome them. Now, the moment that we can overcome them, the soul's purpose can be implemented in this lower triad. We learn to clear out these eddies by introducing constantly, of course, positive powers of the higher self. We have to understand that hovering over us eternally, waiting for us to make the move, is the higher triad of the soul. And if we can live the qualities of Atma, if we can live the qualities of Buddhi, if we can practice higher manas, drawing these energies increasingly down into this lower triad, then we do two things which enable the soul to express itself in us. First of all, we widen the antakarana. We widen the antakarana, the bridgehead between the soul and its lower triad. There they are, the soul and its lower triad. We start off with a narrow antakarana, a sort of thread sutratma that allows the energy of the soul down from the higher triad to the lowered. But by the processes that I'm going to give you, by removing the obstacles on the path, we widen the antakarana so that the energies of Atma, Buddhi and Manas can come down. Secondly, we need to live a life that is attractive to these higher energies of Atma, Buddhi and Manas. A person who has the left side of the brain dominant is a person that is not going to be receptive to Atma, Buddhi and Manas, possibly to Manas, to abstract thinking to some extent. But generally speaking, a person entirely functioning through the dominant side of the brain is a person not receptive to Atma, Buddhi and Manas. One of the ways in which we can learn to bring these energies down is through the practice of dharana. Dharana, which is concentration. Last night I gave a talk on Kundalini and indicated that through the processes of concentration, man has slowly built into his equipment that which encourages Kundalini fire. And we need all to be reborn, to build into ourselves equipment that will allow Kundalini to completely regenerate and replace the tissues of our bodies. And the way to do this, of course, is through concentration. Learning to do it as an ordinary man, and then later increasingly using the powers of concentration as we become a disciple. Then, of course, the other way is the meditative way of life. The meditative way of life. And this reinforces both these principles of widening the antakarana and of bringing down Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. Now, when we bring Atma, Buddhi, and Manas down into the aura, these eddies and whirlpools are removed. And integration of personality comes rapidly, and the masters begin to use that person as a sound, two-bladed sword or instrument of their work on earth. And bringing down Atma, Buddhi, and Manas slays the Raja, the lord of the senses, which we call the mind. And so we can approach now the subject of obstacles and deal with them quickly and effectively. What are these obstacles that produce the eddies and whirlpools in our emotional and mental natures so that they can't pick up, like a mirror, have reflected into them Atma, Buddhi, and Manas from the soul? The first one is avidya or illusion, unwisdom, illusion. Gupta vidya means the ancient wisdom. Avid vidya means lack of wisdom. And lack of wisdom is shown best in a person as illusion. H.P. Blavatsky made a very important statement in terms of the two cerebral hemispheres, and this was their statement. Intellect generally lives at the expense of wisdom. Intellect generally lives at the expense of wisdom. Intellect, the left cerebrum, lives at the expense of wisdom, the right cerebrum. And that was a very profound statement. But our answer to this, as the esotericist, is that an integrated personality under the direction of the soul can combine both intellect and wisdom. For average man, this is impossible. He is so concerned with material things, with sensory attractions, with diversion of his consciousness, that intellect grows and grows and grows, and wisdom is like the rich grow richer and the poor grow poorer. We understand that very well. All the wrong people in the world have the money, that sort of thing. And this is the case of the left hemisphere. In any battle, always the intellect will dominate that aspect which we call love wisdom. And so these whirlpools exist in us. I like Leadbeater's description of them. He said they are like warts. They are like warts in the mental and astral bodies, where there is excessive growth of cells and where there is, as it were, a creating of whirlpools of vibrations which are not very nice at all. Now, you and I know that these whirlpools affect us profoundly. No two people see one thing alike. No two people see one thing alike. Whether it's an accident in the street or a crucifixion, no two people see it alike. The crucifixion may be seen by one person as a justifiable punishment for that rebel. Another person sees the crucifixion and doesn't give a hell about the rebel. He sees it with compassion and feels for the individual on the cross. That's what we mean here, that these whirlpools affect the way in which we see things, the way in which we hear things. It confuses us. As Hamlet says, of course, everything to him, when he was in his state of depression, is sicklied o'er with a pale cast of thought. And a man who is depressed is a man who is seeing things differently from a man who is elated. So who is right? Who is correct? Who is seeing that which is correct? Neither of them. So long as we use eyes and ears and the five senses, we will never understand the truth. You have to go to things directly, hence the necessity for meditation, and hence the necessity for damping down on this obsession with the left cerebral hemisphere. And so, as Hamlet would equally say, the native hue of resolution, and by that he means the soul's purpose, the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with a pale cast of thought, and its currents turn awry and lose the name of action. The soul's purpose loses the name of action because of these eddies and currents in a personality that's not adequate. Now, this great diversion into ignorance and illusion is called, in the Hindu terminology, klesha, K-L-E-S-H-A. And out of it arises some further ones which we will deal with quickly. The second one is asmita, and the concept is here of I am this and I am that. And we're all of us doing a little dance as a puppet in this respect. One moment we are at home having breakfast for the family and we dance to a certain tune. The father of the family, the breadwinner. Then we're at the office and we're dancing another tune. We are the head clerk or we are the office boy or whatever it is. And so we become, as it were, obsessed with these personalities, these little personalities that we live in. And this is a great barrier on the path. The deluded disciple ends up by serving these whirlpools, these little eddies or personalities in his everyday life. And so very frequently, because of this asmita, men seek inordinate wealth as fame or as power. And C.W. Leadbeater, in his book, The Paths of Occultism, quoted this. When a man looks over his country houses and his townhouses and his yachts and cars and his farms and his factories, he swells with pride, thinking himself great because he is the owner of all these things. Or he hears his name on everybody's lips and feels that thousands of people are thinking of him with praise. This is the worst form of asmita. Thinking because you have money in the bank, that you have an extra house, a townhouse and a country house, that you are something different, and you are, as it were, better for this, greater for it. It is asmita. The spiritual man, on the other hand, counts himself fortunate if he can master the coordination of both his hands and of his brain. And when you see the Hindu dancing, the various movements that were gone through, the ability to move a limb in one direction and the other limb in another direction and the third limb in still another way, you are seeing a person being taught disciplines which bring into function both sides of the brain, usually at the expense of the left. And so this is asmita, and the way to overcome it is to use both sides of the brain and to bring through intuition. Then we have the third and fourth obstacles, raga and dvesha, liking and disliking. So many of us are guided in our lives by liking and disliking, which may show as attraction and repulsion. And they arise out of these small personalities that I was talking about that we live in, the father of the house, the chief clerk, and so on. They arise out of these personalities. It is as though we allow our automobiles to take over from us, as if they have voices of their own. It's just as if we said there's no driver. The driver's not important. The automobile is important. And suddenly the automobile takes over and the driver is ignored. The soul is ignored. And it is the car that has the intelligence, the automobile that has the intelligence. And instead of the driver, the soul deciding where the vehicle is to go, it isn't that at all. It's the vehicle deciding. The automobile decides. The personality, which should be the vehicle of the soul, listen to the words that I'm choosing here, they're important. The personality, which is the vehicle of the soul, is deciding, not the soul itself. And so when we ride down a rough road, the car complains. The road is rough, it's shaking the guts out of me. The car speaks with a voice of its own and expresses its discontent. And then later, when the highway becomes smooth and wide, it expresses its pleasure as it purrs along at 60 miles an hour. Everything's fine, the car says. I've got off that rough road, I'm onto a smooth road. Everything's fine. But the driver of the car hasn't had a word to say yet. The road may be a bad one. Well, indeed be a bad one, but from the point of view of the car, that is important. But from the point of view of the soul, the driver, the real driver, it's a damn good thing there's a road at all. Because if he needs to get somewhere, and he is the driver, the soul, the road is better than nothing. Now this idea, this concept of the automobile is a very important one. This is a country, this is a nation that is built round its automobile. You don't know it until you go abroad. You see how other people live. And then you begin to see that this is true. You are built around your automobile. Without an automobile, you're in hell. You can ration anything in this country, but if you want to hurt the people, ration gas. And then things become chaotic. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this is that in the Anglo-Saxon ashrams, the symbol of the motor car is becoming increasingly important. We are elaborating a system of Western symbols for the new yoga, and increasingly watch out for the symbol of the motor car in your dreams, in your meditations, in your higher experiences. And don't think that it's too mundane to have any spiritual meaning for you. It has a lot of meaning for you. There's the car that is running out of fuel, and you are being depleted of energy. There is the car that is taking the wrong road. The personality is going the wrong way. The driver is not having any say at all. The car is just taking the wrong road. The driver is wrestling with the steering wheel, but the car won't listen, and it turns to the left instead of to the right. The symbols are important. There's the car that is moving backwards, which is involved in, not in regression, but in involution, going the wrong way. You're involving instead of evolving. You are taking a steady course which is against the soul's wishes. Or there is the car that has brakes that won't work, the car that is out of control, the car that won't steer, the car that is stripped down and rifled of all its beauty, all its finery, its accessories, as it were. Watch for them in your dreams. Make your subjective life creative. Don't say, oh, that's silly stuff. If you're still at that stage, there's something wrong with you as a disciple. You learn that these symbols, though they may sound silly to your friends, it serves you right if they sound silly. You shouldn't be talking about them. Because when you chatter and chatter about these things, you are degrading them. Be silent about them. And so I give you very valuable advice here. Look into your whole symbology. By now, if you have been on the path for 2 years, you should have a list of at least 50, 60, or 100 symbols that mean things to you. And they should be extracted and a list of them made. So when you have dreams in the future, you can come to adequate conclusions as to what they mean. The importance of the obstacle here is that we should not bother about our likes and dislikes as personality. They're not important to the soul. Don't appeal to the soul for mercy in that respect. Your likes and dislikes as a motor car are of no concern to the driver of the car when he has purpose motivating him. Your likes and dislikes are not important. We need not refuse comfort when it comes, but we must be prepared to give it up when the driver, the real I, the soul, wants to go somewhere, down a road that offers no comfort, a road that is hard and cruel and upsetting to the vehicle. This is the obstacle, a great obstacle to most individuals at this time, who won't stand up to stress, who won't face it. They think stress is bad for you. Even Hans Selye, the great endocrinologist, the great expert, world expert on stress, says that this is nonsense. Must stand up to stress. It can be very good for you. Not comfortable or convenient, perhaps for you to break up a marriage, or to maintain the marriage, or to stand by an obligation, or to help a spiritual project at the expense of your personality's comfort or wealth. But you should think very carefully from now on about everything that you do. Is it the car that you're considering, or is it the driver of the car that you're considering? Everything that you do, don't think that you can escape. Don't think that you can make exceptions for this or for that because it suits your purpose. This is what we call obstacles. Likes and dislikes must go. And I'm talking about things that are entrenched in the dominant half of the brain. Every one of these is not just given to you to give you a verbal beating. It's given to you to make you understand that these things are entrenched in the dominant part of the brain. The dislikes and the likes must go, so that the calm judgment of the soul, of the driver, of the other part of the brain can be heard. The last of the obstacles is concretization, and it is by far the worst. It's what the Hindus or the yogis call abhinivesha, a state of being fixed, attached to some form or mode of life or personality aspect, a state of being fixed. And out of this arises fear of changing. I am afraid. How many times haven't I heard people say that on the verge of a superconscious experience they pull out of it? Why? I am afraid. I was afraid. People, the man who is afraid, the man who fears death especially, the person who is in a state of being concretized. Want to give advice and therapy to a man who fears death, and you will meet them. The most extraordinary situations arise where a person that you would think is completely and utterly balanced fears death. They're studying Bhagavad Gita, they're meditating, and they fear death. Such a person, fixed and rigid, very fixed and very rigid. The therapy, of course, is to break his fixedness, his rigidity, get him out of his fifth-ray groove, get him into art, get him into something else, so that he can, as it were, round out his personality, and such fears go. Fear of change and conditions of living, fear of death is just a change of state. Almost all men become concretized at some space or the other. Far more than women. Women very rarely concretize as much as men. You know, there are people in this life, in this world, who spend their whole youth preparing for old age. I had an uncle, after I had lost my parents, a guardian, an uncle who made me insure myself at 17. I couldn't see the slightest reason for it, but I should go and insure myself, so that when I was 55 I could draw $2,500, and I must pay money each month of my young life, make heavy sacrifices, so that when I was 55 I could draw $2,500. Fortunately, that when the war came I gave that up pretty rapidly. You know, spend their whole youth worrying about getting old and preparing for old age, and when they are old, when they do get old, they spend all their time when they're old searching for youth. But isn't it true? It's absolutely true. They search for youth so that they can enjoy the security that they've gained. They've thrown away their youth looking for security, and when they're old, they're looking for youth to enjoy the security. Or they're afraid to use their bodies in case their bodies wear out. These are the people that suffer from energy lack. Yes? Giving you good therapy advice here. The sort of person that worries about energy lack is the person who is worrying about his body wearing out. Oh, I can't do that. I haven't got the energy. That's the sort of person who is concretized in the fact. Let me give you a fine example of it. The Englishman is more typical of this than I know of anybody, any race. At great sacrifice, the Englishman will buy himself a new car. It's a great status symbol in to have a new car. He will work and slave to get that new car. And when he gets it, he leaves it in his garage and walks to work. Not only does he leave it in his garage and walk to work, he uses it rarely. Goes out for a drive on Sundays, that sort of thing, in order to keep it new. Why does he keep it new? So he can sell it again at a good price. Or worse still, he spends his whole weekends polishing it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you can't get through to people like that. Their whole lives are oriented around a damn car. A car is God, and it could be a yacht. One of my dearest and closest friends, disciples, a young man who lives on the West Coast, and he spent 5 years building a yacht, and this yacht became a challenge to him. Every penny he had, every moment he had, he built the yacht. Then suddenly, he had just had a ray reading, he suddenly saw the stupidity of it all. His whole life had been organized around this damn yacht. It was a great decision for him to make, and he sold it. Ever since then, he has begun to expand himself into new horizons. You know the story of Robinson Crusoe? He spent years and years chipping away at a boat, a huge log that he had up on the foreshore, and he chipped away at it and turned it into a boat. He wanted to get away from this island. And then the day came, it was finished. It was glorious. Found he couldn't get it down to the sea. Too heavy for him. There are people, ladies and gentlemen, that do that all their lives. They build up on some false premise, and they throw a life 2, 3, 4, 5 lives away. on a false premise. Why? Because the premise is insecure. It has no soul value. It is transient. It will die. It will pass away. Those 2 or 3 houses, the several yachts and motor cars, that the wealthy person regards as a symbol so important to him to hold on to. So we have a Howard Hughes and others. So it must come to this. Golden lads and girls all must, as Sydney says, come to dust, says Shakespeare. Whereas, at an instant, our real work is to do what the soul wants, not what the personality wants, and to expend anything that you've got and everything that you've got for that purpose, the soul's purpose. Then you can die like a Swedenborg, when there is just nothing left of the personality. All of the personality, mental body, the astral body, and the physical body has been burnt up for one supreme cause, purpose of the soul. Then you can die like a Swede. Leave behind you a rich heritage for those younger brothers on the path. Discipleship, it is through sustained concentration, or what we call dhyana, meditation, that the barriers of these 5 obstacles are broken. Don't go at them like a bull in a china shop. Hey, I've got these 5 obstacles. I'm going to knock them all off at once. They'll knock you off. Approach them at all levels. Learn to meditate and brood upon these facets of your consciousness. Am I concretized? Am I involved in these obstacles on the path? You know what I'm talking about. I can see it from your faces. Now we come to consider, having looked at these obstacles and aware of the fact that they are entrenched on the left side of the brain, dominant half of the brain, they are part of our intellect. Now we come to consider the relationship of the 2 cerebrums and know quite clearly that if the one cerebrum can be freed from its dominance, from the dominance of the other, we become more fulfilled. Most of the trouble, especially with men, is that the dominant half of the brain crowds out the intuition. Know what scientists say? What is woman's limb? A woman's whim. Yes, you know what I mean. So we talk about the side of the brain, one side of the brain being dominant. Which is it? It's always the side that carries the primary speech faculty. If this is where speech resides, the capacity for speech resides there. And if you are speaking with the left half of the brain, then that is the dominant half of the brain. There will be a speech faculty on the other half of the brain, but it will not be the dominant half. It will be less used. You'll see what I mean by this in a little while. So the primary speech faculties indicate which brain is the major one or dominant one. Now we can go into the subject. Activities on one side of the brain, of course, bring a mirror focus on the opposite side. The other hemisphere learns, understudies the dominant half. Less dominant acts as a reserve in case the dominant side is damaged. So if the dominant side of the brain is damaged, the less dominant side can take over, and science is always amazed at this, that the less dominant can manage in a time of crisis when the dominant half is damaged. Now, what does this mean to the occultist? It means that if you can learn to do things with the less dominant part of the brain, you will be able to do those things in the astral and in the mental world. So long as your faculties of movement, etc., are confined to the left cerebrum, and the right cerebrum is hardly functioning at all, then movement in the astral world will be limited. Movement in the mental world, movement in the inner world will be limited. But if, conceivably, you learn to use both hands effectively, write a letter with both hands, be able to move limbs with the same degree of efficiency with both hemispheres, you learn to move in the inner world more efficiently, because movement on the less dominant of the brain gives capacity to move subjectively, and by subjectively we mean esoterically the inner world. Now that is a very profound and important consideration. When we split the brain, as occasionally happens in a surgical operation or in a wounding in war and battle, brains are linked together by the corpus callosum. Some of the tracts cross from side to side. When we sever this, when we cut it, then we find strange phenomena occurring. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. You've looked this up in the experimental work done in this connection. When is this likely to happen in discipleship? It happens in a condition known, advanced stage of discipleship, as continuity of consciousness. And in continuity of consciousness, the right cerebrum's activity, or the less dominant cerebrum's activity, becomes so dominant that when the left side goes to sleep, the body is asleep, the right side is active. The person is maintaining continuity of consciousness, and because he is asleep, the left side's effects are lost, damped down, begins to function on the other half of the brain. Of course, this leads to tremendous growth and awareness, the functioning consciousness almost entirely with the right half of the brain. Has various problems, though. Let me cite one of them in my own life. I very frequently bite my tongue during my continuity of consciousness. Go to sleep at night, and I think, although I'm fully conscious 24 hours a day, even while the body is asleep, I might be speaking in the inner world, and there will be movement of my jaw. And whilst the tongue is asleep, it's lolling and it's relaxed, and down the jaw comes and flushes the tongue. This is one of the things that I'm leaving for posterity. It will be in my spiritual diaries, one of the problems that have to be overcome. One of the reasons why in yoga you are taught to sit in a Padmasana posture, so that the tongue cannot loll. The head is mainly forward and down and centralized and face. So I say that there is a whole new field of investigation there, and I'm only a pioneer. I may be wrong in some of the things that I am citing and seeing, but I am more or less alone in this respect. Wait for some of you to come forward and shoulder the burden of this research. Sometimes, in my own experiences, when the right brain is functioning, especially after samadhi or meditation, I can touch my head or parts of my body. They feel just as if they belong to somebody else. I am functioning on the right side of the brain, but all my life I have felt my body with the left side of my brain. When I now go to feel my body, it feels as if it belongs to somebody else. There may be many qualities here related to schizophrenia. I merely point out that there are certain things that pop up or observed when the right side of the brain begins to function, and it functions almost uninhibitedly when we develop continuity of consciousness, so that the physical body and the left side of the brain go to sleep. The right side of the brain is then freed to express itself. The right side of the brain is generally mute, but sometimes it will protest at what the left side has done or is doing. You can see this quite clearly in an individual. A person speaks hesitantly and says something, and then they begin to get a bit of a tremor like that. And it's because the right side of the brain, which is intuitive, is disagreeing with the intellect. And this often occurs for me. Not that I develop a tremor, but I'll show you in a moment what I mean by that. And I believe that much of the voice of conscience that so many understand well, because when the left side is speaking and is functioning intellectually, the right side is not happy with what is being said or done intellectually, begins to protest. Feel it as a voice that says to us, no, that's wrong. I've been unfair. I've been unkind. I've been harmful. Right side of the brain. Be noted that swearing and singing are often cited on the opposite side to the speech, meaning the less dominant half of the brain. Swearing and singing. This has been seen frequently, for instance, in children, because children function on the right side of the brain if the left is going to become dominant. They tend to do this, and children are often known to sing endlessly. Sing everything that they do, everything that they think. They sing about it rather than talk about it at a very early age. And this is indicative that that child is at that stage of development functioning mainly through his right hemisphere, just before the left ascends into dominancy. These children, when they are noted for this, they are generally very psychic, very psychic. So a characteristic that you can look for in spiritually evolved children is this capacity for singing. Now let us go into adulthood and talk about swearing. Swearing seems to be a right-sided aspect, indicating a temporary rejection of the individual of what the left side has done. I'll give you an example of it. Jam your finger in the door. The left side of the brain was responsible for this. You jam your finger in the door and you say, damn it! It's the right side that is protesting at what the left side has done. When I asked Madame Blavatsky to give me a symbol for the right side and the left side of the brain in conflict, she gave me the symbol of two hands, like that. They were arguing with each other. There they are. There it is. The right side and the left side arguing with each other and occasionally punching each other. A very fine symbol it is, too. Helps to explain many things. So, the right side comments on the inefficiency of the left with a good swear word. Damn fool, what have you done now to me? Right-sided people, and I have them in my own ashram, right-sided hemisphere people, usually have excellent musical comprehension. They comprehend music far better than they can, as it were, reading and writing. Excellent musical comprehension. And they have the ability to verbalize songs, turn songs into words. Stuttering is often as a result of developing a speech center on the right side of the brain whilst you're still functioning on a speech center on the left side of the brain. With the development of these two, you get, as it were, hesitancy. What word shall I use? Is this the right word? The left and the right side are arguing with each other. Some notorious surgeon, I won't mention his name, even cured stuttering in an individual by scooping up part of the right side of the brain related to the speech center, and the stuttering was cured. Right dominance often indicates the fact of the person being more susceptible to hypnosis. The person is right-sided, dominant, they tend to be more susceptible to hypnosis. To suggestion. To the suggestions that can come from the higher worlds as well as from hypnosis. They are what we call receptors. Right-sided people produce more alpha rhythm. When alpha rhythm is predominant and is spaced out, then you get extrasensory perception, as demonstrated in Zen Buddhism. Right-sided people frequently have euphoria, and it's a lovely euphoria, not a dangerous manic condition, but a lovely euphoria. They touch everything with their euphoria. Their love nature, we call it, lightens everybody up, takes away the cares and worries and conflicts of the rest of the group. But look for right-sided people for your groups to cement them together. Don't have too many will rays in your group. They'll fragment or concretize. Which is worse, I can't think. Another quality of the right side of the brain is, of course, ineffability. Ineffability. You'll have to look the word up yourselves. To me, it means the indescribable. The indescribable. They have experiences that are indescribable. So, summarize, let's consider some of the qualities of these two hemispheres. Generally speaking, the left hemisphere, which is dominant, is will rays. Extrovert people, will rays dominant. The right side, love rays. Left side has scholastic aptitude. The right side has verbal aptitude. Beautiful poetry. Visual experiences put into words. Poetry, the use of one word to express many. Thinking in categories. This is all right-sidedness. Remember that most of the masters have been poets in their lives. The left side, the scientist. The right side, writing ability, vivid imagery. The left side, less sociable. The right side, more sociable. The left side produced tics and twitches and nervousness far more than the right side. The left side, less sleep than the right side. The left side prefers cool colors. The right side prefers warm colors. The right side is more likely to be sociable, but also to be susceptible to alcohol. Alcoholic. Alcoholism is generally related, in a great deal, the inability to express love. Inability to express love. I'll be dealing with the top causes of alcoholism in Cleveland when I do my first certificate towards the Diploma of Esoteric Healing in a month's time. The left side tends to choose careers early in life. The right side a little later or never. The left side is less musical than the right side, less religious than the right side, and less asthmatic than the right side. Left side is more inclined to headaches and migraines than the right side. The left side can deal with spatial problems more effectively. The right side can deal with linguistic problems. The left side writes accurately and correctly. The right side writes phonetically. Anything can go down as long as it expresses the sound, as it were. Now, I have noted some qualities of people who are predominantly left-sided that have not yet been observed by science, but will come out because this is a new field. Quite often you get a person who groans and grunts in his sleep. A person who groans and grunts in sleep quite unaccountably, can't find out what it is, and even though they themselves know that they're groaning and grunting, they don't know why. And usually it is a person who is completely and utterly left-sided. The dominance is so much that the right side attempts to speak the moment the person goes to sleep. There's an attempt to express itself. So the therapy for this would be to teach the person to sit in silence, to cut down on left-sided expression, cut down on sensory perception. Let him learn, as it were, to withdraw from the senses. I love the great symbol of the cerebral hemispheres that Browning gave me. And he said the cerebral hemispheres could be likened unto two fishes. Cerebral hemispheres could be likened unto two fishes. And of course, Pisces is the sign of the two fishes. And the two fishes are equal. And that makes Pisces a very intuitive sign. It's the great intuitive sign. It's the sign also of love wisdom, where both hemispheres are allowed to manifest themselves more or less equally. Then, just finally, before we finish here, psychopathy tends to be manifested, sociopathy tends to be manifested by the left side of the brain, whereas the right-sided person tends to meditate more easily, tends to be able to slip into meditation. The most intellectual people often have the greatest difficulty with their meditation. Left-handed, left cerebral people are people who have high thresholds to stimuli. They are less aware of vibration that the right-sided people pick up very, very easily, whereas the right-sided people have a low threshold to stimulate. They're very, very susceptible to pain and the feelings of others and consideration of others. Left-sided person has a highly and overactive sympathetic nervous system, whereas the right-sided person has a stable nervous system. Tests on heart rate, galvanic skin response, and so on seem to prove this. I want to end with a consideration of autistic children in this respect, because somebody talked about autistic children the other day. Now, when I dealt with autistic children, always in my research work with Robert Browning's group of medical people in his ashram, I always asked for a symbol of the condition. And the condition of the autistic child that was flashed to me was two fishes. There they are, two fishes, with two cerebral hemispheres, with one fish completely and utterly asleep and the other flapping about as if it had been drawn onto dry land. The one fish completely and utterly asleep, and that was the right-handed one, and it was a fish that, believe it or not, sat up hardly awake at all. But the left-handed fish was flapping and very, very active. This is true of autistic children. I don't care what science will tell you. I'm telling you what I know about them. The autistic child is this dominance of the one side of the brain to the exclusion of the other. We will have to see whether time will prove me to be wrong or whether time will prove me right. Always remember that, from the occult point of view, the way that can be described, not the way. Write that down. The way that can be described is not the way. By that we mean the way that can be intellectualized is never the way. That's why the mystic always has such a difficult job describing the past, describing the inner world. The right-handed way needs to be described in a right-handed way. Cannot describe the by right-handed, I mean the right-sided way. The brain cannot be described by the left-sided. If you understand what I mean, I'll give you the quote again. First line of the tale, that is EC 600. The way that can be described is not the way. Now I just want to end on this last note about mantras. Repetition of any neutral word will keep the left hemisphere of the brain occupied so that it can't flash out a beta rhythm. And whilst the left side of the brain is occupied by the mantra, repeating it endlessly and endlessly, the right side can become functional. Right side can become functional. And this can be used in meditation. By the endless sounding of a mantra, we can keep the left side of the brain occupied to free the mind of the right side of the brain, the intuitional part of the brain. Finally, there are possibilities with regard to pain in this respect of understanding the cerebral hemispheres. One of the meditations for the lowering of the pain threshold, the raising of the pain threshold and the lowering of the amount of pain experienced is to go along with the pain. You've got toothache, go along with it. Every throb of the tooth, yes, let's have more of it. More pain, more. You go along with the pain, and you focus on the pain to anchor the left side of the brain, the left cerebral hemisphere to the pain, and the right side becomes more prominent. When the right side of the pain of the brain becomes more prominent, pain registered by the left side, amount of pain suffered. Work that out for yourselves. You'll see the importance of it, and you will understand how that meditation helps. Ladies and gentlemen, I've given you rather a long lecture here, but I felt that I should finish, and I do hope that you find it useful to you.